Good to be here. Good to see everyone this morning. Let me say very quickly, there was a mix-up at the Biblical History Center, and I'd originally had been asked about the earlier morning tour, and then they got mixed up, and so now we're down for 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, and basically that'll be one of the what they call the Hall of Artifacts. We'll do it 1 o'clock. The meal would be 1:30, maybe 1:45 or so, and then we would go and do what's called the garden tour. And so we would be leaving here about 11:30 in the morning, and get back 5, maybe 5:30 in the evening at the latest. I say all that just to say this: that knocked out a huge portion of those who had already signed up to go. And I apologize profusely, and as I told them, I would be more upset about the mix-up down there, except the lady that handles all that, her father had a massive heart attack, and she had to pretty much drop everything and drive to Florida and look after him for several days. So I understand her getting it mixed up. I'm just sick that it's knocked out a number of our people, but that leaves several other openings. So if you could go, I'm going to go anyways because I'm leading that tour. But it will be, like I said, leave here about 11:30, get back 5, maybe 5:30 in the evening. It's $40, and we'll just the only thing is I need to know by probably tonight or in the morning so that I can get that all squared away with the reservations. If you don't or if you can't, we're going to be going again before too long because all the folks that had to back out on account of the time change want to be able to take them because those folks wanted to go. That said, we are continuing our series that we've done once a month this year. We've called it the Moral Church. We've talked about morality before. It's actually been a while, and it's kind of why I came and wanted to sort of go back, at least hit some of the same topics, but with the theme of the moral church. God's people are to be moral people. We're told in the book of 1 Peter, be holy because he is holy. Holy means to be set apart. The idea of being moral people, the idea of morality means being set apart from the world as far as how we behave and conducting ourselves with our lives in accordance with the Word of God. The one we're talking about this morning is gambling, this moral issue of gambling. Sometimes people have questions. Why do you oppose gambling? What's wrong with gambling? As you can see from the slide here, you may recognize that. I'm going to go ahead and tell you up front, I'm very much indebted to my good friend Don Blackwell. He has a video that he recorded through World Video Bible School. They recorded it and edited, produced, and distributed it. But it's called The Truth About Gambling. In fact, there's a series called The Truth About, and they have several topics covered. Just on this particular, if you get it, it's got several lessons. The Truth About Moral Issues. There's a series called The Truth About Worship and things like that. They're all top-notch. Most of those are done by Don. Several of them are done by other preachers. But I talked to Don some time ago, and I said, Don, I don't know that, I don't know if I can come up with a better approach than how you have approached it in this video. And he told me, he said, Chad, there personalization here and there, but this is the bulk of this is Brother Don's material, and it's just excellent material to cover and answer the question of why would we oppose gambling. Sometimes people say, I just don't really see the big deal about that. Well, let's look and see what does the Bible say. I want to say this at the outset. Sometimes, and Don mentions this in his video, and I think it's a really well-made point, sometimes we use really weak arguments talking about this. And two prime examples, I think, are the concept. Sometimes people will say, well, maybe even say to their children or somebody, well, we don't need to be gambling, stay away from that because the Bible teaches you got to work for your money. Well, the Bible does teach a principle of hard work, and it teaches the principle of working and being rewarded for that financially. But what if somebody wants to give you a gift? Should I, every Christmas, every birthday, if somebody says, hey, I want to give you this, happy birthday, or Merry Christmas, have this gift, and I say, whoa, I'm not taking that, because the Bible says I got to work for anything, even just money. You know, sometimes as parents, we do that for our children. Maybe they need some money. We say, well, here's some money. You can go out and do something with your friends, or sometimes even grown children. Parents may say, hey, look, I understand you're struggling right now, or whatever. I'm going to help you out, or vice versa. Children may help out the parents. Sometimes people even will get so, and I think if not careful, it can be pride. We know, like, I'm not accepting any kind of a gift. Well, the Bible doesn't say that you always have to work for anything you receive. And so we need to understand that. That's kind of a weak argument. I've heard that said before. Quite honestly, I'm pretty sure I've said that myself before and studied this a little further. I realize that's not a sound argument, because there are times, yes, the principle, the overarching principle is we ought to work for our money. But there are times when you may receive a gift. It may be in the form of some kind of an object or a present, or it could be just financially. And of course, sometimes people receive an inheritance. Is it sinful to receive an inheritance because you didn't work for that? No, that's the choice of the one who's leaving that to you. Another weak argument that we sometimes use is, well, you need to stay away from gambling. We need to stay away from gambling because we ought not be taking risks like that. Don't be fooling around with things that involve chance. Well, there are lots of things that are risks that are not sinful. Every time I get in a vehicle, that's a risk. If I get on an airplane, that's a risk. If you walk around in the air, there are always germs and things like that. That's a risk. And so that's a really weak argument to say, well, we'd all stay away from risks. There are lots of things in life that involve risk. That's not what makes gambling something that we need to stay away from. So that said, let's define what do we mean when we talk about gambling. Gambling it could be defined as you have an uncertain, arbitrary event. And that part does involve chance, but it's not the chance or the risk itself, in and of itself, that makes it wrong. So you have an uncertain, arbitrary event. You also have a wager. There's something of value that is deliberately chanced on a particular outcome. Maybe I'm going to put down $10 in the hopes that here's the outcome, and that makes me the big winner. Somebody else may put $10 on the hope that something else is the outcome. You see this a lot, and I think I've mentioned it before and preaching on this before, that sometimes when I was working at Blue Cross, they would put together these boards. Of course, we were up in Chattanooga, Tennessee at that time, and we were in Vols country, unfortunately. But so a lot of people they'd have this one guy in particular, he'd put together this board, and you could buy a spot on the board, and I think it was something for a particular score of the game, or maybe a point spread of the game, or whatever. Of course, and you see this all the time. A lot of times you'll be just looking on your phone or your iPad or some kind of an app and say, I'm just trying to see what time the game comes on. There's this, this negative number or whatever, and it's trying to show you who's favored and by how much, and all that is for the gamblers. So you're wagering something. You got this uncertain, arbitrary event. Here's, in that case, the result of a football game. Nobody knows what's going to be. It's uncertain. There's a wager. You put something down, deliberately chanced on this particular outcome, whether that's a score or a point spread or whatever it might be. Then you would have a winner and a loser. The winner wins at the direct loss of the other gamblers. So maybe here's somebody who's got this board for his football game that everybody's wanting to watch and see what's going to happen on Saturday. And 10 squares, $10 a square, you can get one on there. And you got, he'll say you got a 10% chance of winning. So there's $100. That's the pot. Well, at the end of the game, somebody comes out a winner. But you know what that means? 9 other people lost. And so you might win, 9 other people lose, or somebody else might win, and you and 8 other people come out losers. That's how you would define gambling. You got the uncertain, arbitrary event. You have a wager, something that is of value. It doesn't always have to be cash, money, or whatever. But you deliberately chance that on a particular outcome, and then you have a winner and a loser, with the winner or winners winning at the direct loss of the other gambler or gamblers. Now, we're breaking this down, as you see, if you have your handout, just into basically 2 different points. Biblical reasons to oppose gambling, and then some objections that sometimes people will make in defending and saying, I don't really see anything wrong with it, here's why. So let's look, first of all, at the biblical reasons why we would oppose gambling. Why would we say this is something that Christians ought to stay away from? Well, number one is it is almost always motivated by covetousness. What is it that motivates people to gamble? They want to get something. That's the idea of covetousness, and particularly getting something from somebody else who's involved in the gambling. You know, this is one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not covet, Exodus 20, verse 17. We're not living under the 10 commandments or the law of Moses any longer, and so that's not something that is authoritative for us today, but we point that out because it is going to be a New Testament principle that is taught in the New Testament. The word covet, of course, means to lust after, to long for, to desire something that belongs to someone else. Luke 12, verse 15, Jesus says, take heed and beware of covetousness. For a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth. Covetousness motivates, as I said, it's nearly all of gambling. I won't dare stand up here and try to tell you it's 100%, but it is the vast majority of the time the motivating factor. Why does somebody stop in and they say, get me a Powerball ticket, or I want to grab a lottery ticket, or several lottery tickets? They want to get some money. They want to strike it big. So there's that covetousness. And I'll tell you, a lot of these, you think about these sort of, I think about it like a cumulative, almost like a snowball effect. When you put all these things together, it just, to me, makes it very easy to see why I, as a Christian, as a part of the moral, holy church of Jesus Christ, I don't want to participate in this. I don't need to participate in this. This is not something God would have us to be involved in any way. That is gambling. Number 2, we need to point out that gambling preys upon others' weaknesses. You know, somebody might say, well, it's their weakness. Not my weakness, but it's theirs. And that's true. If it's somebody else's weakness, then that's something that they need to work on. But do I want to try in some way or another, or however I can, to help them with that? Or do I want to say, you know what, I see you got a weakness here, and I'm going to exploit that, see how I can benefit myself from it. Now you tell me which is the Christian mindset. Christian principles are the exact opposite of what you see within gambling. Galatians 6:10 is very clear. Let us, as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto those who are of the household of faith. It doesn't say, man, if you see somebody's got a weakness and you can profit from that, go for it. That's not a Christian principle. If nothing else, it's not practicing the golden rule from Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. You know, it's interesting. You can do studies, and the busiest days in casinos are when the government checks go out. The very next day, they'll tell you that's the busiest day. People who have a weakness, and they go and they just blow that money. And here are the casinos just taking advantage of that. That's not a Christian principle, folks. I hope you don't even need me to tell you that. One study showed that the poor bet 3 times what the upper and middle classes bet, whether casinos or whatever form of gambling. 3 times more. And yet, those would be the ones who could least afford it. So do I take advantage of that weakness, or do I look for ways to try to help? State lotteries in Connecticut and in Massachusetts have been shown to be the equivalent of a state sales tax of over 60% on lower income groups. Now, if an elected official in one of those states, or both of those states, were to come up and say, look, here's my platform for re-election, or for re-election for that matter. We're gonna impose a 60% tax on those in the lower income brackets. Man, people will be all up in arms. And they say, what? I cannot believe how you're going to take advantage of these people. And yet that's what the state lotteries have been shown to be the equivalent of in those states. And some of those same people, if you tried to take away the state lottery, oh man, they would have a fit. Why do I want to prey on others' weaknesses? Should I not be trying to help them? Here's another one. Reason why we would oppose gambling, the fruit test. You want to look at Matthew chapter 7. There's a very simple principle here that Jesus talks about, and it's what we sometimes just call simply the fruit principle. You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. And he goes on, he says, a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. And then verse 20, he says, wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. There's the fruit principle here, and this is true of people, but we can also look at various things, and this is what sometimes when people come to me and they say, well, Chad, I can't find a verse on this, but I'm trying to do the right thing, and I want to determine, is this something I need to be participating in, or I need to abstain from participating in? How can you help me determine? One of the things that I sometimes will tell people, and myself as well, is, well, let's look at the fruit of it. Because as Jesus said, an evil tree can't bring forth good fruit. A good tree can't bring forth evil fruit. What kind of fruit does gambling produce? Well, when gambling arrives, when it arrives into a community, does it raise moral standards or does it lower them? I think I've told you before, when I lived up in the St. Louis area, just across, a little bit across the river of the Mississippi River, well, after, I don't know the year, but after some time, gambling arrived on the east of the river over in Illinois, and even for a time, they would have these riverboat casinos. They still have those, but those started off because you couldn't have gambling in Illinois. So you'd have it on the river, as just near as you could get, you know. But it finally came over, and there's a town just as you cross over in Illinois called East St. Louis. East St. Louis is a scary, scary place. You don't want to go there, especially after dark. But do you know every single elderly member of that congregation up there, if you keep on going east, just another, I don't even know if it's 10 miles, you'll end up in Collinsville, which was where I was working at the time. Every elderly member that could remember when the casinos first came into East St. Louis, they said that's when things changed. East St. Louis used to be such a nice town, such a nice place, they would say, but all that changed when the casinos came. It doesn't raise moral standards. It doesn't improve living conditions in a community when gambling arrives. In fact, it's always the exact opposite. In Gulfport, Mississippi, they haven't had gambling casinos terribly long there. It's been a few years now, but it hasn't been just an outrageous amount of time. But 8 months after those casinos opened, I'll tell you a little bit about what the police noticed. Murder went up 75%. It almost doubled. Rape went up 200%. That's triple the number of rape cases. Robbery went up 311%, quadruple the number of cases. Assaults, 64%. Burglary doubled. Car theft, more than doubled, almost tripled, 160% increase. 3 years after casinos arrived in Atlantic City, they went from 50th in per capita crime to first in the nation. That's been some time ago, but that tells you just how quickly it happened. That was within 3 years. They were lowest in the nation, crime rate per capita. And within 3 years, they were the highest. You see the fruit of gambling? There's some statistics in Nevada that also speak volumes. These, sometimes these vary from year to year and sometimes even from source to source, but Nevada always ranks, of course, Nevada is famous for Las Vegas. But it always ranks near the top, if not top, in suicide, divorce, high school dropouts, homicides against women. It's always way near the top in gambling addiction. Last I checked, third in bankruptcy, in abortion, fourth in rape, fourth in out-of-wedlock births, fourth in alcohol-related deaths, fifth in crime, sixth in prisoners locked up, but dead last in voter participation, except in 2020, I'm sure. What's the fruit of gambling? You see the fruit that is produced, and it's not good. That tells us something just in and of itself. Well, another reason I would oppose gambling, and I believe it's clear that Christians ought to as well, is the Proverbs 13:11 principle. Proverbs 13:11, this is what it says in the King James: wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall increase. Now, I mentioned before, it's a biblical principle to work for money. And that's the idea here. He that gathereth by labor shall increase, but that's not the only principle taught here. The ESV has it this way: wealth gained hastily will dwindle. That's often true, even when it's a gift. A gift may not be sinful, but isn't it a whole lot easier to spend that $20 bill? Teenagers, shake your head like this when it's not yours. Isn't it a lot easier to spend that $100 bill when it's not yours? Yeah, I remember. Buddy, when I worked and I got the $20 bill, the $100 bills, it was a lot harder to let go. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle. And you see this again many times with inheritances, not inherently sinful, but a lot of times it's easier to take it for granted, is it not? But whoever gathers little by little, he says, will increase it. That's the ESV there. The footnote on hastily in the ESV is by fraud. Wealth gained by fraud will dwindle. Other versions have something like wealth from get-rich-quick schemes quickly disappears. Wealth from hard work grows over time. Or something like, one version even has, wealth from gambling quickly disappears. Wealth from hard work grows. This is the Proverbs 13:11 principle here. Working for money, making that be your main source of income, but understanding that wealth gained hastily or by fraud or by vanity, as the King James puts it, well, it dwindles, it diminishes. So that's the Proverbs 13:11 principle. We could also point out that gambling is addictive. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are expedient. He puts it, he says, all things are lawful unto me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but listen to what he says: I will not be brought under the power of any. What he means by that is I'm not going to be brought into a state of addiction. He says, I am a servant, I am a bondservant, a slave to Jesus Christ. No one, no thing else. But what happens with gambling is a person wins, and what? That's exciting. And so, man, I have won $200. I'm sitting here at the blackjack table, or I'm rolling the dice, or whatever it may be. I got $200. And so they say, what? I don't want to quit now. I'm riding a hot hand here. And so when they win, they want more, and it'll consume them. But there's a saying, the house always wins. And so when they lose, they say, I got to keep playing. Just a few minutes ago, I was up $200. Give me time. I'll get it back. I got to win it back. And sometimes they'll go and they'll start getting rid of things and taking out loans that they can't pay and things like that. And all just because I got to get it back. But it's consuming them. That is a full-on addiction. The Nevada Observer made this statement that gambling is recession-proof. Why is that? Because people are addicted to it. A recession can be no matter how bad, how severe, but the things people are addicted to, they're going to get. And people that get addicted to gambling, they're just going to keep on gambling, even in the midst of a severe recession. Gamblers Anonymous exists for this very reason. In fact, most lottery tickets, there's a number. I find this highly ironic. There's a number on the back of the lottery ticket to the gambler's hotline. If you have a problem, keep buying your tickets, but if you have a problem, call this number. And the taxpayers will pay for you to get help for your gambling problem. There's just so much irony there and so much just head shaking that I guess we better move on. Pawn shop owners will talk about people that will pawn limbs, artificial limbs, glass eyes, gold teeth, and so on. All kinds of just strange things, trying somehow to get some little bit of money so that they can fund their gambling addiction. It is highly addictive. And that's why Gamblers Anonymous and things like that exist. We can further say it is just simply, it's poor stewardship. It's poor stewardship. Matthew 25, Jesus talks about the ones who were entrusted with talents, and that's, we sometimes think of that as ability, but it's talking about money there. And so they were called to give an account of their stewardship. Do you know the odds of winning the lottery vary from anywhere from like 18 million to 1 to something like 120 million to 1? You have better odds of being struck by lightning. There are better odds of you dying from a flesh-eating bacteria. There are better odds of 2 out of 3 people. Here's Billy and 2 others. They're on the golf course. They tee off. 2 out of the 3 get a hole in one. As long as I'm not in that party, you'd have a lot less chances, I suppose, if I was in that party. But 2 out of the 3 tee off, hole in one. Better chances of that than winning the lottery. That's pretty amazing. Better chances of dying from a snake bite. Better chances of dying from a bee sting. On and on we could go. It is insane, these odds. And yet some people, again, you see the addiction. Some people will get there and they're kind of like, well, so you're telling me there's a chance. Well, the Powerball odds, 1 in 146 plus million. The Mega Millions, your odds are 1 in 175 plus million, almost 176 million. My point being here is that God's going to hold us accountable for our stewardship. You think about if your financial planner says, I'm going to take all of your retirement savings, I'm putting it we strike this big, you are set. I'm talking to the tune of like 200-300 million. Don't you worry. I know you got 10 years to retirement, but we hit this, you retire today. Just stay with me. One catch. It's a 1 in 175 million chance that we don't just lose it all. What do you say? Do you say, go for it, man? That sounds great. With all your hard-earned retirement funds? I don't know anybody with any sense who would. But that's what we do many times when it comes to gambling. God's going to hold us accountable for our stewardship or lack thereof. It's required in stewards that a man be found faithful, 1 Corinthians 4, verse 2. Somebody said, I couldn't find a source for this, but one man said, the lottery is a tax on people who can't do math. I think there's some truth in that. I can't do much math, but I can do enough to tell you I'm staying away from that lottery. Only those who don't understand the odds play the lottery. Well, there's also the influence principle. Christians especially need to realize this. Even the world realizes and recognizes gambling as a vice. It's considered a vice. But Pure religion, undefiled before God and the Father, part of it, James 1:27, is to keep ourselves unspotted from the world. You know what they call Vegas? They call it Sin City. Oh, the commercials, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, they say. Keep telling yourself that. But why do they say things like that? It's understood as a vice. Can you imagine trying to talk to somebody about the gospel as you're sitting at the blackjack table? Or you're rolling the dice? Or I can't even imagine, even after I bought a lottery ticket and I turn around, hey, what about you to our upcoming gospel meeting? Who could imagine? In 1 Corinthians 8:13, Paul makes a statement. He says, if meat will make my brother to offend, I will eat no meat while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend, to stumble, to sin. He wouldn't even do something lawful, and that's his point here. There's nothing wrong with eating meats. He says even if it's been offered to an idol, it's nothing. An idol is nothing. But he says, you know what? If that causes my brother to stumble and to sin, I won't touch it. I won't eat another steak while the world stands. That's something that's not wrong in and of itself, but much less something that violates Christian principles. There's an old proverb that in a bet there's a fool and a thief. And you know, neither one does my reputation any good. So there's the influence principle. Well, number two that we want to look at here is some objections made in defense of gambling. What somebody might say, well, I don't see a problem with it, and here's why. Sometimes people will say, well, Chad, I can't find a verse in the Bible that says not to gamble. Well, that's true, but you know there's not a verse in the Bible that says thou shalt not on many things. There's not a verse that says thou shalt not do meth. There's not a verse that says thou shalt not do crack. There's not even a verse in the Bible that says thou shalt not baptize babies. But we understand when you study these things in principle, there's no authority for baptizing babies. There's no authority, and again, you get into the moral issues when you're talking about meth and cocaine, crack, and things like that. There are a lot of things the Bible doesn't explicitly come out and say thou shalt not, but it opposes in principle. And truthfully, there are verses that deal with gambling, and they deal with it in principle. Beware of covetousness. A man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possesseth, Luke 12:15. The verse we read in Proverbs 13:11 deals with it in principle. Sometimes people will say this, well, I mean, hey, all of life is a risk. Well, that's true, but the risk factor here is irrelevant. We've already pointed out that's a weak argument as far as using that to try to oppose gambling. The risk factor is irrelevant. Gambling's not wrong because of the risks. It's the other things that we talked about in our first point. Sometimes people will say this, well, gambling is no different than investing in the stock market. Well, that's just simply not true. The stock market is not an artificial risk. In fact, you see, you profit or lose, you have profit or loss based on the economic performance of a company. You're not seeking to gain at a direct loss of others. In economic gain, you have profit that comes from exchange of goods and or services. In the stock market, you would invest in something, a company typically, and your money then goes to work for you. And so you profit from letting someone else use your money, just like when you put money in a bank. There's an interest rate, albeit a small one, but you're profiting from letting them use your money. Somebody else is using your money to do business. This is an honest economic principle, and you see that again in the parable of the talents, Matthew 25, 26, and 27. He says that one talent man, should you not have given it to the lenders? I could have at least gotten mine back with interest. He says you could have invested it, if nothing else. So that's an honest economic principle. So to say it's no different than the stock market just simply is not true. Sometimes people will say this, they say, well, but don't you know good comes from it? I want to say this, first of all, that's a lie. And I would say the devil loves that lie. But let's just follow that line of thinking for just a moment. What about abortion? The killing of an unborn child. Is it wrong? Oh, of course. But what if we used aborted babies for stem cell research? Then would it be okay and we should start saying, well, let's don't oppose abortion because, we could use those fetal cells for stem cell research. No, it's still wrong. What about alcohol? Maybe your child wants to go out and do some drinking. Says, look, I'm I'm hanging out with my friends. We're having a good time. This is how we just kind of kick back and have fun. We'll stay at home, won't go out or anything. Is that a good thing? If good comes from it, don't be ridiculous. But then sometimes when people turn around with the lottery and they'll say, well, it's for the kids. That's a good thing. It's not a good thing. In fact, it's quite interesting. There was a columnist for the Stockton, California Record, and he mentions that the social problems created by gambling far outweigh any benefits to the community. And in fact, the Nevada Resort Association claims a third of their gaming dollars go to education. 1/3, they say, goes to education. But the Nevada Department of Education website, Quick Facts, it reports about 15% going to education. Where's that other 15, 18% going? I'd like to know. Oh, but then they say, turn around and say, hey, it's for the kids. Good comes from it. The benefit argument, that's just another lie of Satan. But here's the bottom line. Even if we were to say, you know what, yeah, good comes from it, really that's irrelevant because two wrongs do not make a right. Paul said he was slanderously reported to have said, let us do evil that good may come. Did you catch what he called it? He called it a slanderous report. He says that's not the way it works. Two wrongs don't make a right. Well, sometimes people will say this. They'll say, Chad, look, I only spend $1 a week. It is a cheap way just to have some fun. I had a fellow that I used to know. In fact, I went to preaching school with him. He told me this one time, something to this effect. He says, it's $1. It's a cheap way to have fun. Sometimes I'll stop in at the gas station. This was a gospel preacher. Sometimes I'll stop in at the gas station with the kids. We'll buy a lottery ticket and scratch it off. Brother Brinkley used to say some folks got that itch, so they're buying lottery tickets and scratching. But he says it's just having fun. Cheap way to have fun. Sometimes along with that, sometimes people will say it's a cheap way to have something to hope for. And are you kidding? You want something to hope for? How about laying up some treasure in heaven? Matthew 6, verse 20. That's where that's where the Christian's hope is. It's in heaven. It's not on a lottery ticket. It's not even if you had the winning lottery ticket. That's not our hope. How sad that people would say that. That gives me something to hope for. Those are folks that need the gospel. What if we applied, though, this little bit argument to other things in life that go against Bible teaching? Well, somebody might say, I just look at a little pornography. What's the big deal? Cheap way to have fun. I only cheat once in a while. Hey, I can't go home and tell my parents I failed that class, so I cheat a little bit. But, it's no big deal. Somebody may say, I only cheat on my taxes once in a while. Is that a big deal? I only cheat on my spouse once in a while. We wouldn't buy this in other areas. And then furthermore, do we even realize what $1 a week would do for so many missionaries and the work that could accomplish for the cause of Jesus Christ? Man, so much good could be done with just $1 a week. Look, the devil will come up with all kind of lies. It's for the kids, good comes from it, things like that. The bottom line is, as Brother Don says in his video, any way you roll the dice. Gambling, it's sinful. It's not something that God's holy, moral church should be engaged in. I'll tell you the sad thing, though, is the gamble that so many people take. They're not in the Lord. Some people, they're not following God. They've never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ through faith, turning away from sin and self and confessing Jesus as Lord and being baptized into Christ, into that covenant relationship with God. The gamble they take, waiting on this uncertain event we call tomorrow. Gambling with the most precious commodity that they have. The only thing really that we have that we will take from this life, and that is our souls. God's people have no business fooling around with gambling, but the greatest tragedy of all is gambling and saying, maybe I'll get right with the Lord tomorrow. Maybe I'll get right with the Lord later. Because we don't know what even the next moment holds, let alone tomorrow or on down the road. What about you this morning? Are you where you need to be spiritually? That's why the invitation is extended. Can we help you in some way getting right with God, staying right with God? Don't gamble and say, I'm going to do that later. Do it now. This is all we have. Can we help you? Do it now while we stand and sing.